times with dunderheads like me. It was from Damon Knight. And the letter from Damon Knight said, "Hey Jim, why are you wasting your time on those woolly-headed college students? Write me some more stories." And I thought that was funny. But I'm glad that he wasted his time on me because I learned a lot from him. One of the things I learned from him, it was probably the most important thing, was that I didn't know what a story was. I thought I knew what a story was. And to be honest, I can't even say that I learned what a story was from Jim. But I did learn that there is such a thing as a story, and you can learn about it. Jim's way of teaching was he would assign us to write a story. We would write a story, and there'd be like 20 students sitting around, and we'd all read through with like 2 or 3 a class. Everybody would read along as the person was reading their story, and then we would all give our feedback, and Jim would go last, and Jim would say something like, "Well, the reason that doesn't work is it's just because you started out telling story A, and you ended telling story B, and it doesn't resolve." And so after I got out of graduate school, I had a novel that came out a number of years later, and I was asked to speak at a library to fourth graders. And I went on a walk, and I had pondered, how do you teach, in an hour, what a story is to fourth graders? If you can teach what a story is to fourth graders, then you're onto something, because it's difficult. But I realized I didn't know how to do that. And so I spent quite a bit of time pondering the definition of a story, the components of a story, what we might call the elements of a story. I went through public school, so I don't know how many classrooms I had way back when, where they would have posters on the wall that said the 5 elements of literature, or the 5 elements of writing or something, and they were always the same things: characterization, plot, setting, theme, and style. And I realized after I got out of graduate school that those 5 things were extremely useful. They're a valid way of analyzing a story, but they don't work very well as creative tools. They're tools of analysis. They're great ways to take apart something that already exists. When you have a page that has words on it that's trying to tell a story, you can turn that into a functional essay, analyzing the thing. But they're not very inspiring as creative tools. I don't think Mark Twain ever sat down and, I need some characterization and a plot and a setting and theme and stuff. I don't think he did that. I never do that. I don't know that I've met writers that do that. I think we grope for something that will help us to find the muse or that creative wellspring where sometimes you have it, right? You write a story and you go, I don't know where that came from. It feels like a gift. And that's why we have the idea of the muse. Well, as I was pondering how to teach this system of thought, or like story writing to children, it occurred to me that whenever I go to watch a movie, whenever I open a book, a novel or something that I'm excited to read, or even a collection of short stories, I'm always looking for something, and I know when I've gotten it. By the end of the movie, I know whether I have whether that movie has captured my interest, whether it's entertained me, and whether I feel like I'm even a different person at the end. So I know that I'm looking for something, and so this slowly turned into not just a personal odyssey, a kind of quest for like understanding what is it that makes a story a story. It turned into a series of answers, and I don't think I'm arrogant enough to say that this is the answer. This is just one way of looking at it. There are many valid perspectives. In fact, Damon Knight wrote a book called Creating Short Fiction. If you want to write short stories and you don't know where to start, you've never heard of that one, that is a great book. So it may seem a little outdated now, but his thinking about this is fantastic. And genre fiction in particular is really good for studying how stories work, because often the plot dynamics are somewhat obvious. No matter how much background or lack of background in story theory you have, you can usually from genre fiction kind of dial into what's going on with the plot. So they're good for that. But what I'm going to do in this presentation is take you through 5 different elements of story. And I call them the 5 creative elements of story because they are essentially the things that you're looking for when you sit down in a movie theater, when you pick up a book to read. You're looking for an experience. And the experience you want to have is you want to be moved emotionally. So the first thing, this isn't one of the elements, but this is the primary driving goal for every story, is it has to be entertaining. And that means it has to make the reader feel something. So the goal of every storyteller is to create emotion. Stories are vehicles for emotion, and they're that first. And if they don't achieve that, they won't succeed as a story, no matter how brilliant the prose is. A story that bores the reader is essentially not stimulating them. So what you're doing is you're numbing them to a catatonic state or whatever. You're not presenting. You're not stimulating emotion. You're stimulating the lack of emotion, and so this is why even bad stories can work. So like not to be too cruel to the filmmakers, but I think I saw Meg 2 this summer, The Trench. Saw the poster. It said "New Shark, Old Chum," and they had me. That's a movie I've got to see. Terrible movie and a wonderful movie at the same time. It's just, it knew it was trying to be terrible, and so it achieved the effect. Right? There are some stories that are trying to be. They're trying to like grab your heart and wring tears from you, and you can't help but laugh because it's so unrealistic. The characters don't behave the way real people would. They say absurd lines. And if the storyteller knows that's what he's going for, like with Meg 2, The Trench, then a line like so in Meg 2, they're descending down below the thermocline layer in the ocean, the deepest part of the ocean, right? There's an even deeper part than the deeper part of the ocean, and it's below a thermocline layer. So it's actually warm down there. It's colder and colder and then warmer. And there's not just one Meg shark down there. There's 3 of them, and they know where they are because they're tracking them. And Jason Statham goes down in a submarine with his team, and his niece has stowed away on the submarine. And she pops up right as they're about to go through. And of course, he, being a good adult, says, "We've got to go back up." And his team, being bad adults, say, "Oh, come on, she wants to be a scientist, right?" And the niece says something like, "Please," So Jason Statham has the best line. It's the best line in the entire movie. It's the best line I've seen all summer. He says, "Okay, but if you see something dangerous, let me know." Now that's the sort of line that you can't get in most summer blockbusters. Is absolute brilliant. And I chuckled for like 5 minutes about that line. That's the filmmakers knowing they're being absurd in order to make me laugh, right? So that if you understand your goal, then you're succeeding whenever the audience reacts the way you want them to. So what makes this form of storytelling, the written form, the most difficult kind, and it's one of the most difficult arts. Some people would say it's the most difficult art, and here's why. Imagine you're learning to play the piano, and you've got a keyboard, a beautiful baby grand keyboard, but it has no strings in it. It just has keys, and the keys are actually digitally wired to strings, a big soundboard, in the other side of the building in a soundproof room. And you're going to hit a key in the room with the keyboard, you would have to be in 1,000 feet away in a different room, a soundproof room, to actually hear it. You can't hear the sound that's being produced. This is what you're doing as a writer. The song that you're producing is happening in your reader's mind, and you don't have access to it. I mean, you don't have access to read it. You have write access, but not read access, to use a techie term, I guess. So that's what makes it hard, right? So we have to get feedback from people, beta readers, saying, you didn't, I think you meant to make me cry here, but it seemed kind of boring, or I couldn't relate to the characters. So you got to have someone in that room telling you what note that you're hitting. And the importance of understanding the elements of story, the creative elements, is that it gives you something to shoot for in creating, in trying to inspire emotion or evoke emotion in readers. So the 5 elements of story that I'm presenting are what you get when you sit down in a movie theater and you're wanting something. These are the 5 things you want. You want someone to care about, something to want, or like a story goal, something to dread, something to not want, because when you get want and dread together, you get this wonderful story thing called conflict. So something to suffer is the 4th one, and something to learn. And I'm going to explain each of these as we, go through this kind of short presentation. Because you can dial into each one of these for hours and unearth techniques that writers have used throughout history. It is really, story is fascinating when you start peeling back the layers. I call it a magical onion because every layer you peel off, you discover that the onion is actually bigger. The more you look at it, the bigger it gets. When I was a kid, I thought stories were just one thing happening, one thing after another. I didn't understand the components that go into them. Now that I understand it a little bit better, I have the sense that I don't understand it at all. That I'm constantly trying to learn. What is it I'm missing? There's more to this that I'm not getting. So we'll start with someone to care about, because someone to care about is like, yeah, technically you could say this is characterization, but your audience isn't looking for characterization. They're looking for someone to care about. And the caring part is essential. You do not have to create a character that your audience likes. It is harder to make them care about someone they don't like, but it is possible. So anybody who has a sibling will have experienced the very human loving your sibling and intensely disliking them, wanting to strangle them because of their rude behavior or the thing that they told their friends about you, or whatever they did, right? And they probably felt the same way about you. Would you give a kidney for them? Yes. Well, you give a kidney for them because you actually love them quite a bit. You care about them. You don't have to like them. And in a story, we're not spending as much time with people, so the more dislikable they are, the harder it is. But you can have a character like Scrooge that you care about eventually. You can start out being like, this person's kind of a jerk, but a good writer can quickly get us so that we're involved emotionally with the main character, because of the techniques they're using. And the main techniques there's 5 of them that are historically the ones that are the most commonly used and the most ancient. The first one is undeserved misfortune. So if you're creating a character, the easiest way to make your audience want the best for the main character and care about them as a person is to make them, not the victim of deserved misfortune, which is another word for justice, but the victim of undeserved misfortune. So this is why fairy tales often begin with some variation of an orphan went off to seek his fortune. It's usually someone who has experienced something they do not deserve. Disney movies, flat animation movies, there's 50, 52, somewhere around in there. I know it's been probably 10 years since I did this, and I don't ever bother to go back because they're not making any more flat animation films the way they used to. But of those movies, there were only 2 of them in which the main character, the protagonist, still had both parents alive by the end. And the reason for that is this technique right here. The more we see someone suffering someone innocent suffering, the more we'll be on their side. And it's not just Disney. It's if I could show a video clip, I'd show you the clip from The Land Before Time where Littlefoot loses his mom. Love that clip, even though in part because of this absurdity of, we're crying over this baby dinosaur as his mom dies in front of him. The reason it works is because it's undeserved misfortune, and we can relate to it. We've all been the victim of it. So when we see it, we go, that is the moral compass of my story. That's the person I'm going to experience the story events through their eyes, and I'm on their side. Even if they do some things wrong, I'm on their side because they got a bad break at the beginning. And that's the deal with an orphan went off to seek his fortune. No child deserves to lose their parents. So we're for them, and we're for them almost immediately in the case of that sort of fairy tale. The next one is power coupled with humility. So there's a movie called Searching for Bobby Fischer, which is a great example of this. It's based on a true story. got a kid who is very, very good at chess. And, he's so good that he goes down to the park and he plays with these guys who've been playing for years. And just after he's learning the game, and he's like causing them to be like, wow, you're good, kid, and he ends up being tutored. And the reason we like him, I mean, he's kind of an innocent kid, and the actor does a great job. The writing is really strong. Um, but he doesn't want to make other kids, when he's playing chess, he doesn't want them to feel badly, so he will throw a game for them. He will let them win. No, that's humility, right? And we recognize as human beings the difficulty of having great power and then coupling that with humility. It's hard, and because we recognize the difficulty, we admire it, we see it as a kind of virtuous thing. It's also a little bit creepy because we're drawn to people with power. We are, as like part of human nature. I wish I could explain it better. But we like power. We like being around power. We like being around people with power. But we also recognize that if someone has power and they start to get arrogant, they will start to quickly feel like the villain who has been, remind us of the landlord or the people, the bad teacher, the people who had power over us and were using it unjustly. So you got undeserved misfortune, power with humility. The third one is morality, and it's related to all of these. But the principle behind this is that every story is really a moral bucket, and that doesn't mean that it has to be. It shouldn't be moralizing. It doesn't mean that we're wagging our finger at the readers. It means it's based on some kind of ought to. We want something to happen. We want the orphan ought not be an orphan, right? It shouldn't have happened. There's something bad about that. So something wrong. We look at it and you go, that just shouldn't be that way. That's what I mean by morality. A character who is who embodies a moral principle, even if they're not pure, they're not like angelic, but they've got some sense of honor or integrity. They're going to tell the truth even when it hurts. We'll be on their side for that sake, and it really can be any moral stance as long as we're connected with them and we understand the why of it. If you start explaining it, then it will quickly get in the realm of sermonizing, and that's not what we want. The example I like to use is of a if you put aside the idea of morality as an ethics class or list of propositions, we should do this and shouldn't do that. That's not the way to be creative with it. What I'm talking about is this: a guy comes, at night, he's walking through an alley around midnight, and he hears a little chirping bark of a puppy, and he goes over and looks, and maybe it's starting to rain, and there's this discarded, like maybe it's just born, a few days ago, so they're little, kind of fluff lumps, with little stubby leg paws. It's kind of wet and shivering and going, and oh, it's a little puppy, and he just boots it into a brick wall. Now that guy is not going to be the hero of your story. Most people in the audience reading are going to be horrified when you have him boot the puppy into the brick wall. That's the villain. The hero of the story, the protagonist, is the one who comes along and finds the little puppy now with a little broken paw, and is like, I'm late for work. My boss said if I was late for work one more time, he would fire me. But he takes up the puppy, goes to the vet, the all-night emergency vet or whatever, and pulls out his credit card and says, yeah, how much is this going to cost me? That guy's going to be the hero. And it's because he's being moral. And we're drawn to that. We're drawn to like base level right and wrong things, and just showing it once. This is why Blake Snyder, when he wrote Save the Cat, the principle that he's working with is this morality thing. And I don't know if I said this earlier, but you don't want to use all of these. You don't want to use every principle and load up your character with these things, because at least at this point in the way we're inundated with stories, readers, even if they don't know why, they will sense that you're trying too hard. They will see it as you're making them sort of unbelievable as a character. So you don't want to do undeserved misfortune and power with humility and morality, at least not all at once and not in kind of obvious scenes. Fourth one is humor. Humor's hard to pull off. I'm going to tell one quick story. It's my favorite story for this because it's a great illustration of why I like one of our presidents, even though this is the only thing I know about it. Okay, so if you ask a crowd of people who their favorite president is, people are going to say Washington. They'll say Abraham Lincoln. Some of them might say, I mean, there'll be a few people in the crowd who will say like, well, Jefferson or Adams or whatever. Maybe Grant. um, one of my favorites is Taft. So Taft was a large man who had a political rival from the state of New York. He was a senator. The President Taft was political enemies, I guess, with a guy named Chauncey Depew, senator from New York. And they were at a dinner party one evening, and Chauncey Depew pointed at Taft's stomach and said, "What are you going to name the baby?" And Taft, without missing a beat, said, well, if it's a girl, Helen. If it's a boy, Junior. But if, as I suspect, it's nothing but gas, I shall call it Chauncey Depew. And that is why I like President Taft. I have no idea what party he was in. I could look it up, but I just don't want to. It's like I heard that story and I went, okay, now that's a great illustration of drawing the audience to the side of a character through humor. The last one is unfulfilled desire. Unfulfilled desire works because every human being has experienced unfulfilled desire. We've all been been kids and we wanted the puppy and parents wouldn't let us have the puppy or the pony or the Red Ryder BB gun. If you remember A Christmas Story with Ralphie, he can't have a Red Ryder BB gun. And even if you don't like BB guns and you don't think kids should learn about guns, if you watch that movie, probably by the end of it, when he gets booted down the ramp by Santa Claus, I mean, I find it hilarious. But I also found Meg 2 hilarious, so maybe that's not a common thing. But I find that movie hilarious, and yet I'm all for Ralphie getting that Red Ryder BB gun by the end, because it's that yearning for something that's beyond, that you just can't have. This is not the same thing as the story goal. This is a character technique where you're pulling people onto the side of the character. No matter who you are as a human being, there is something you can't have. If you're extremely wealthy, I mean, I don't know, but I'm assuming that if you're extremely wealthy, you may find it really hard to know whether you have any friends, because the people around you may be super nice and respectful and all that and deferential, but would any of them care about you if you had nothing? Would any of them help you if you had nothing? So there's always something, right? There's always something that you can't have. So connecting the audience to the character with these 5 techniques, any of the 5, or using 2 of them together somehow, will pull us towards the character and make us care about them. And that's the first thing you have to do. Story is not a story without a person it can be about. Jim Gunn used to say, you cannot tell a story about a ray gun. You can tell a story about a man with a ray gun. So the character is the place to, not necessarily the place to start, but it's an essential element. That's where I start with the 5 elements of story. The second, so we have someone to care about. The second one is something to want. This one's much simpler. This is the story goal, and it is in essence, it's the thing you need to signal to your audience needs to happen for the story to resolve. It's going to happen by the time the story is over, and we need to understand what we're rooting for. I've read a lot of first novels, and some of them are pretty good. Some of them have really fine prose in them. A very common mistake, even with ones that have a story goal, is that the author forgets to plant the necessity of the story goal early in the story. So we might know at some point it might be mentioned, we need to kill the dragon that lives on top of the mountain. But then the writer is putting off that big conflict with the big dragon, and so the writer is focusing on all these other characters, and by the time we get to the mountain or the base of the mountain, we've forgotten why we're there, and as a result, there's no tension. So in Lord of the Rings, the story goal is actually really simple. It's we're going to drop the ring into the volcano, right? It's a line from Fellowship of the Ring, and in the movie version, this happens right at the midpoint. Not coincidentally, it happens right at the midpoint. In the Council of Elrond actually says it explicitly, but he says it in the after Gimli, tries to like destroy the ring with his axe, and gets blown back, and the sound of Mordor, is going. And Elrond says, the ring cannot be destroyed by any power we here possess. It must be taken deep into Mordor and cast back into the fiery chasm from whence it came. One of you must do this. Now that is just all kinds of brilliant, because it follows this simple principle that a great story goal in a story will be something that can be imagined by the audience as a single photographable action. A single photographable action. In Lord of the Rings, the single photographable action that is set up as a point of anticipation in the audience when Elrond says that is that because I hope I'm not giving spoilers, but Frodo says, "I will take the ring, though I don't know the way." Right? The expectation is that Frodo is going to walk up to the edge of Mount Doom with the Ring of Doom, and he's going to let go, drop it into the volcano, right? So we have this kind of, it's not going to match perfectly, but you're imagining something like that, right? A single photographable act, blink. That's what is sustaining that entire 770,000 word work, or whatever it is, that's called The Lord of the Rings. And it's sustaining all 12 and a half hours of the screen time of the director's cuts or whatever. So the story goal is drop the ring in the volcano. And we don't just hear that at the Council of Elrond and then skip to the end of Return of the King and then, oh yeah, there's the ring that needs to be chucked into the volcano. That's not what happens. Along the way, we are constantly reminded by the presence of the ring and the weight of the ring and the impact of the ring, the magic of the ring, the darkness and the evil effect of the ring. Lines like, the ring is getting heavier. It's so heavy you can't even pick it up. And Sam says, I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you. And lines like that, the resistance to this happening in the form of ring wraiths or wraiths on worms, all of the opposition that's around it, in addition to this what I would call a third element of Samwise Gamgee reminding Frodo of his origins, that you're a hobbit. You're not a golem. You're a hobbit. You belong to the Shire. You belong to Middle Earth. You don't belong to darkness. You don't belong to the abyss. And the presence of Gollum, who is reminding us of what the ring does to you. Gollum is constantly reminding us, this is what this ring will do to. It'll make you a conniving, slimy, toady villain if you give in to it. And so the presence of the story goal is all throughout those books and those movies. It's not quite as adroitly done, or I don't want to be too harsh on Star Wars, but Star Wars is a great example of the story goal, because every Star Wars movie pretty much is about a Death Star going kaboom. They're basically all about that, right? We want to see this thing blow up by the time the story's over, and they all work in that regard. They all have a clear, understandable, is it going to explode or not question. It's the same thing as this, only it's just like on a larger scale, right? You want the big round weapon in the sky that looks like a moon to explode. The audience needs to understand it. They need to understand why it needs to happen, what's at stake. We need to have moments like the Mirror of Galadriel, where if you fail, the Shire will be overrun by orcs. Everything you love will be destroyed. We need to be reminded of that. It doesn't always have to be that dire in a story that's not like The Lord of the Rings. If the story is just about someone wanting to graduate from college, it can have great emotive power, but we need to be reminded of the motivations for graduating from college. The first person in our family, in 12 generations, who's ever been educated at the college level or something. And it's that kind of thing that we will gravitate towards. It doesn't have to be world changing. It just has to be connected to an emotional some emotional explanation that we can resonate with. So whatever the scale, we have to understand it. And you create an emotional buy-in from the audience when you make the character someone we care about, and you give them something to want that we want too, and you remind us that we want it as the story goes on. So third thing is something to dread. And something to dread is, it's really simple, right? It's simple conflict. Conflict basically comes in two forms. And if you think of conflict as fights, an endless series of fights, your story probably won't be very engaging. Conflict comes in two varieties. This is what years of studying creative writing will do to you. You'll hear a lot of terms like external conflict and internal conflict, and those things don't help very much when I'm creating. I don't think they appeal to the creative, whatever the part of us is that is creative and imaginative. I don't think they appeal to that. So I like to think in different terms. Instead of external conflict, I think of disasters. Something disastrous happens along the path as your hero's trying to achieve the story goal. Something gets in the way, and he has a setback. That's an external conflict, right? There's they're going through the tunnels, and there's oh no, they were discovered. The goblins are coming for them, and they have a cave troll, and oh, they also have a Balrog, and the bridge is falling, and also they can come out at night, and also we've lost our most powerful ally, and disaster after disaster. This makes the story compelling because we think we're heading towards the big conflict and we're going to overcome this thing, but along the way we're taking a series of steps back. We seem to be moving away from it. Somehow a good storyteller, which is another talk actually, a good storyteller takes those setbacks and turns them into advances forward in unexpected ways. But something to dread is actually the driving principle of all of this. So you have external conflict, but you also have internal conflict. And internal conflict, if you think of it as a dilemma, it will probably be more useful. Any dilemma is a wonderful story device, as long as it is a dilemma between two negative alternatives. It can't be a dilemma between two positive alternatives until the denouement at the end of the story, when the hero is rewarded. As a principle, we're not going to feel investment in a character just because they get to choose between chocolate ice cream and vanilla ice cream. We won't care. I mean, cool, they got ice cream, right? Nor can you have a dilemma. It's not a dilemma if you make them choose between chocolate ice cream and a poke in the eye with a pointy stick, right? That's not a dilemma. That's an easy decision. A real dilemma in story terms is a decision between two awful things. There's a movie called Life is Beautiful, which is Roberto Benigni's, I think 1997, 98, somewhere around in there, about a Jewish father and his 8-year-old son who are put into a concentration camp. And as they're being taken away on the rail car, the wife, who's not Jewish, comes to the station and confronts the German soldier, the officer, and she says, "There's been some mistake." And he looks at the list and he says, "No mistake. You should go home, Fraulein," right? Because she's not Jewish. And there's this moment as the train is starting to pull away where she's realizing her husband and her son are packed onto one of those cars. She doesn't even know which one is there. And she says, "Let me on that train." And he says, "Go home, Fraulein." And she says, "Stop the train." And they stop the train and she gets on. Now that is an incredibly powerful scene. And the root of the power is dilemma. We know, looking at that, the agony of how in the world am I going to live with my husband and my son. We're feeling that with her. How is she going to live with them going away to a concentration camp? And so what is her choice? It seems like it would just be go home and weep for years or whatever, but no, she does this incredibly brave thing, right? Stop the train. I want to get on the train. I'm going with them. That's a dilemma. Two terrible alternatives: go to the concentration camp yourself, or stay behind and always wonder. That's fantastic storytelling, right? So one of the principal things of the something to dread to remember. Sometimes I should say this too. A lot of stories embed this dread around a character like Darth Vader or Sauron, where the villain is actually kind of an embodiment of this dreadful thing that we don't want to happen, as well as a negative ideal like revenge or hatred, selfishness. unbridled power, like totalitarianism, something like that. Um, dreadful, dreadful promises that you make in your story must be fulfilled if your reader's gonna trust you with the story. So this is a simple thing to remember about this, something to dread. When you tell your readers, I would not go through the mines of Moria unless I had no other choice. You can't let them, I mean, obviously they're going through the mines of Moria, right? But you can't let them get through the mines of Moria without there being something dreadful. And the dreadful thing has to be worse than you promised. Always make your dreadful, always fulfill them, your dreadful promises, in ways that are worse than you want them to be, so that your audience will trust you. Okay, someone to care about, something to want, something to dread, something to suffer. We are looking for something to suffer. When you sit down in a theater seat, when you open a book, you are looking for an element of suffering, even though it seems like you're not. And I've had people tell me after this, like, I don't know if I really want to suffer something. I'm trying to escape my suffering. And I say yes, but here's the thing. The story goal requires our emotional investment. And the only currency that a storyteller has for demanding the emotional buy-in from the audience is the suffering of the main character. And it's 99% emotional suffering. And the reason for that is the goal of every story is to create emotion. So you can have physical suffering in a story, but it doesn't affect us the same way because we're not feeling the physical pain. And even though you can make it really graphic and you describe that, we kind of recoil from that. We don't want it. So you will notice in Lord of the Rings that the physical suffering it like dies out. It's all along, but there's not a lot of focus on it. There's not a lot of detailed description of it. And the closer you get to the story goal, the more all of the focus becomes on the emotional consequences. So emotional pain is actually the kind of currency that we're looking for: guilt and loneliness and shame and betrayal. Sometimes writers make the mistake of going right away for death, killing off a character and thinking that's going to make us cry. But we won't cry because a fictional character dies unless we understand the consequences. We have to know the character, or we have to know the consequences of their death in order for us to care. And the real principle of this is that the suffering a character endures determines the value of what he or she wants. When Billy Crystal bought one of Mickey Mantle's gloves in, like, I don't know what it was, 2005, or it was somewhere in the early 2000s. He paid, I think, $239,000 for it. I watched like a 60 Minutes program, and I like, he paid that. That is so much money. I mean, that's worth more than my house. Like, that guy has too much money, right? No baseball glove is worth $239,000. I was wrong. And I realized I was wrong about an hour later. I thought, I'm not being fair in this. Something actually is worth what the highest bidder, not the lowest bidder, but the highest bidder is willing to pay for it. And we kind of feel that. We abide by it. It's British common law, it's insurance law, it's like eBay, it's Sotheby's, which is where Mickey Mantle's glove is sold. When we're watching a character suffer for something, we will buy in. I can tell you a story about a prince who went to rescue a princess who was locked in a tower, guarded by a dragon, surrounded by a moat. And let's say the prince, wants to marry her. He's heard about her, that maybe they've been communicating or something, and he rides off he finds her in the castle, and he comes up to the moat and it says, "Beware of crocodiles." And he's like, "Oh, I would love to rescue you, and I'm not afraid of dragons, but I have this thing about crocodiles. I'll come back with my dad's army." You're not telling me he loves her. You're telling me the opposite. You're telling me, maybe he's not a coward. Maybe he's not a wimp. Maybe he really does have a problem with crocodiles, but whatever it is, I have no idea whether he loves it or not. That same story, if he swims across, fights off the crocodiles, pulls down the drawbridge, raises his shield just in time to block the fiery breath of the dragon, stabs it through the missing scale, runs up the tower steps and kicks in the door. He's sure done a lot of work. But does he love her? I don't know. Maybe he does, but you haven't proven it to me. the prince who swims across the moat and gets a leg bitten off, and then somehow pulls down the drawbridge and gets hit in the face with the fiery breath of the dragon, and somehow maybe, through his determination is able to kill it and still crawl his way up the tower steps and put the key in the door and push it open before dying. These are all silly stories, really. I would never want to write one of these, but that third version at least convinces me that he loves her because he paid a price. And that is the simple principle. You make your characters pay a high enough price emotionally. When J.K. Rowling was asked if you could talk to your character, this was right after the 7th book came out, I believe. If you could talk to your character and tell him one thing, what would you say? Her response was, I would tell him I'm sorry for everything I've put him through. Well, that response encapsulates this principle and her genius in writing the Harry Potter series. The last thing. Okay, thank you. The last thing, fifth thing, is something to learn. As the readers, we don't want to be told a theme. We don't want to be told a moral lesson. We want to be shown something that changes us. So if you think of this more as a revelation through a change of a character's heart or mind, you will have the principle better. We're looking for something to learn, but we want to learn it. We don't want to be told it. We want to learn it, which means the story itself has to prove the thing to us. This is usually done through a clash of ideals. You have something like Les Mis, where Jean Valjean, the criminal, is hunted by Inspector Javert. Jean Valjean is imbued with a positive ideal from the priest that he steals the silver from. It's an iconic scene. He steals from this, like his first night out. I think the priest welcomes him in, gives him a place to stay, and then he steals the guy's silver, and the cops catch him, and they bring him back, and they say, "This is your silver, isn't it, Father?" or whatever. And the priest says, "Yes, it is, but my friend, you left in such a hurry, you forgot the candlesticks." And he gives him silver, and the man's like, Jean Valjean is like, "Why did you do this?" And the answer is, I've purchased you for God. You need to now live a better life. And so he does. And at the end of the story, he ends up, spoilers for Les Mis, I assume it's out there, everybody's seen it in some form. He rescues Inspector Javert during the revolution, takes him through the sewers, gets him out. And Javert, who is the embodiment of justice, is defeated by the embodiment of mercy. Javert can't live in a world where justice needs to be rescued. Now, we're not told this. We are shown this. And it's a very simple message in a way, but it's not a message that's ever spelled out. It's a message that is just shown to us over the course of the events. There are other examples I could use, but since we're running out of time here, I will skip along. I want to give you one more principle. We've got the someone to care about, something to want, something to dread, something to suffer, and something to learn, right? Those 5 things. If you concentrate on those 5 things, if you ask yourself as you're writing, how am I going to make, who should they care about and why, and what do they want and what does it cost? You ask yourself those kinds of questions. Your story will at least begin to feel like it has a skeleton. Now you still have to do the hard work of brainstorming and coming up with scenes, and I'm not someone who thinks that everything can be outlined. I'm an outliner, but I never follow my outlines completely. I use them as a target, as something to shoot for, and then I give myself space to ignore my outlines when something seems like, oh, this is a cool idea that I wasn't expecting. So I'm not suggesting that everything should be completely plotted out in advance. I am saying that if you understand these 5 elements, it will make things a little bit easier. I'm going to end with this story by this is just a little anecdote from Stanislaw Lem. Has a story called Trurl's Electric Bard. I came across this in one of Jim Gunn's classes. Trurl has invented a machine. Like, it's not named ChatGPT, but he's invented a machine that will write poetry, beautiful, wonderful poetry, better than Shakespeare poetry, better than John Donne poetry, better than Gerard Manley Hopkins poetry. And he's telling his neighbor about it, and his neighbor doesn't believe him. His neighbor says, garbage in, garbage out. There's no way it's writing really good, thoughtful poetry. And he says, well, I mean, look at all of this. And his neighbor says, no, if if you want to convince me that your machine can write good poetry, have it write a poem based on my specifications. And Trill says, well, what specifications are those? What do you want it to write? And he says, have it write a poem about a haircut, but make it lofty, noble, tragic, full of quiet heroism in the face of certain doom. 6 lines long, cleverly rhymed, and every word beginning with the letter S. And of course, Troll says, that's ridiculous. You can't give it such stupid parameters and expect. But before he finishes his sentence, the voice of the computer can be heard from the other room saying aloud, seduced. Shaggy Samson snored. She scissored short. Sorely shorn, soon shackled slave, Samson sighed, silently scheming, sightlessly seeking some savage, spectacular suicide. I love that poem for its cleverness. I love that part of the story for its cleverness. The principle behind that I'm trying to get across, though, is if you give yourself some boundaries, even if they seem absurd, the boundaries that you give yourself can actually be freeing. Nothing is harder for your imagination to do than to create out of nothing. You need to give it some fuel, and boundaries are fuel. And these 5 elements can actually be boundaries that can fuel imaginative takes on whatever it is you're interested in writing about. So I realize I'm basically out of time here. Do we have time for questions? I mean, I'm happy to answer them. Okay.
Someone wants you to just repeat the 5 elements again, so they can
Sure.
write
Okay.
them
So
down.
someone to care about, something to want, something to dread, something to suffer, and something to learn. Yeah, character, story goal. You could say a villain, but it's more like that force of antagonism, a price paid, and then a theme, something embedded in the story.
Okay, thank you. That's all the
Yeah,
questions we had. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Next hour, we will be having a presentation by Robert Hatch. Thank you, Daniel Schwaber, for joining us, and
thank you.
we'll see you next hour. everyone. Thank you for joining us this hour. This hour, we will be having a pre-recorded presentation by Robert Hatch called What Directors Wish Writers Knew. As a brief introduction to this presentation before I hit play, this was recorded while Robert Hatch was traveling. So it was recorded in multiple different pieces and then edited together. So you'll notice that he changes location throughout it. Without any further introduction, we'll now watch the video.
Hello, my name is Robert Hatch, and I'm a filmmaker and writer and producer. Right now, I'm going to have you go to a section where I had recorded previously, and then that'll give a good background of some things, and then I'll come back here for the balance of it.
I wanted to start by giving you a mindset here, and then I've got more than a dozen things that are really important that I feel strongly about and anxious to see in scripts that I read that people want me to correct. And here are the key elements that I'm presenting to you. I'm going to start with two of them together right now because these, more than anything else, and then the other things follow and they support and buttress it all up. But these two things, more than anything else, will make it so you have scripts that make great films that audiences are just riveted to, and in whatever genre you're doing it. So the two things that I'm speaking of is, imagine they're watching the film you have written the screenplay for, and suddenly the power goes out in the theater. Two emotions immediately come to the fore, to the consciousness in the audience, which may not have been conscious before that, but they sure are now because the film has stopped. The first one is, what do I hope will happen? The first one is hope. What do I hope will happen? The second emotion is, what do I fear will happen? So what do I hope will happen? What do I fear will happen? Those two things you must set up early on in the film and throughout the film and repeatedly in different settings, different scenes, different sequences, and among different characters, but mostly among your key characters. And the hope and the fear are the driving force that glues eyeballs to the screen, those two things. So I want to talk now a bit about how you create hope in the audience, how you create fear in the audience. By fear, I mean it's hope for this to occur for the key character, and it's fear that, on the other hand, that might occur. So I hope this will occur, I fear that might occur for this character. And that's the glue that grabs minds and hearts, eyeballs to the screens for your film. So let me talk about hope and fear, how you set those up. First of all, every character has to have something they are seeking ultimately. And as they are seeking and moving through the difficulties and all the other things that you put in their way, they are seeking something. And it is what they are seeking that is the key. It is what is at stake. So I will make a list as I'm writing. I will make a list. What are some of the hopes that will occur in the audience regarding this character? Some of those hopes, many of them, perhaps the majority of them, will also occur in the character and the audience. If the character wants this, the audience also wants it. There are some things that the character is not necessarily seeking, but the audience certainly wants. So they're not necessarily congruent. But I will make a list. Here are some things that the character could hope for. Here are things I want the audience to hope will happen at this point, at this point, at this point. When I mentioned the idea that if the power went off in the movie theater, suddenly audiences say, whoa, whoa, well, I want to see the rest of this. I'm hoping this will happen. I fear that might happen. Those things will change over time and in different aspects of the film, different acts of the film. First act hopes and fears are not the same as second or third act hopes and fears, although there is a large major dramatic question which should run pretty much the whole film. So I'll give you some examples of these things, the hopes and the fears. I'll tell you one of the classic films that I think had either the longest or among the top 2 or 3 longest reigns as highest box office grossing film of all time. Well, one that was highest box office grossing film for 16 years running. And that meant also ancillary markets and video, DVD, all of that, sales and TV. But one of the longest ones, and a great example of this, is the film from way back in the 1980s called E.T., E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Steven Spielberg had the idea for that film. He's the one that took it to the screenplay writer. And he had the idea for that film of the premise of an alien, small alien, searching for a group of them coming to Earth and searching for samples they might take back, and one of them is left behind. And so from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, what do I hope for? I hope E.T. can get back home. That's the hope. What do I fear? I fear that these people that are faceless and nameless, but they're seeking and running after and searching for E.T., they might get him instead of these youth, these children. And there's the hope and there's the fear. And it carries the audience from the beginning right to the end. And that's what glues eyeballs to the screen and made it such a film that it was highest box office grossing film for 16 years straight. And there are only a few other films that rival that sort of thing. But what I'm getting at here is the hope and the fear. What are the things that set that up and create it? What is at stake? So you make a list of things that could be at stake. And some of them will be large, some of them will be small, some of them will be ancillary characters that might have some of those. Some of them you'll discard and not use those at all. But what is at stake? And so you make a list of those things that would be possible, you might consider to be at stake in this screenplay that you're writing. By the way, when I'm writing a script, I tend to make a lot of lists and notes, my notes there. And so one of the lists is character traits, a whole lot of different character traits. And I want to go over some of those here at the time. But right now, the first list, one of the first lists is what is at stake. What do we have the audience hoping for will happen? And what do we also have in a second list? Second list, what do we have the audience fear might happen? And both of those are needed. You can't just have the one only. It's not strong enough, either one of them. But both together, I hope this will happen, but I fear that might happen. There's the glue. It's kind of like epoxy glue. You have to mix the two parts together. I guess you might say that. But here are some of the things I have on my list, for example, of things that are there. And I'm talking general categories, not specific things on the list exactly for each film. But a category would be what is planted? What do I want to plant? And because those things that are planted in the minds of the audience, like you understand what I'm talking about, plants, you plant this item or this concept or this person's name or whatever it is that is in the mind of one of the characters or observation of a character. And later on, it has fulfillment and sometimes very crucial meaning to them. So that's what a plant basically is. A pointer is a plant, but that the audience registers in their mind, this has purpose later on. That's what a pointer is. The difference between a plant and a pointer is a plant is maybe something the audience doesn't even necessarily register consciously or strongly early on, but later on it's suddenly, oh, it's there. Ah, this is the key to it. But the audience didn't register it early on. A pointer, however, is something that the audience realizes, oh, that's important. That will take on some real meaning later on. I wonder what it might be, but the audience is made aware that it is something crucial later on. So plants and pointers are crucial elements that set up hopes and fears. Another thing that sets up hopes and fears are relationships, particularly, and these are strong ones, especially a romantic relationship perhaps, but also other things. I hope this will happen, I fear that might happen. Of course, a major one is what it is the key character, your hero, character is pursuing. I hope they achieve that they are pursuing. They gain their goal. On the other hand, I fear they might not, but fear has more depth sometimes. The fear is, I fear that this person might do that, a certain thing that would prevent it. And that person might do a certain thing that might prevent it. So the list of fears is much larger than the list of hopes. And that's important to understand that. So let it be long lists that you have, that you pursue. I want to come back to fear and hope again a little bit later, but I want to pursue now a handful of other elements which will help both with hopes and fears, but will also help greatly with the plot and structure of what it is you're doing in your script. So the next element, so I mentioned hopes and fears, and now the next element is going to be, like these next 5 elements are going to be character-based elements. The first one is going to be intent. Intent is a general through line, really, for each character. This person's character, the hero's character, has a certain intent, and that through line is something that carries them forward and is not necessarily too changeable, malleable. It's not part of the arc necessarily, because a lot of time their intent is a permanent character aspect of them. But I say intent. Let me contrast that with the next one. So the first 2 are hope and fear, first 2, and then the third one is intent. The fourth one is the whole idea of what they are seeking at each moment. My goal, or what I'm seeking at this moment, my goal is this at this, in this scene or in this sequence. And that can change, and that has arc to it, much more than just intent. But I mentioned that in intent aspect because that is a through line element that often is a major dominant character in our main character, and some of the other all the other characters need to have there as well. But in our intent, that is the larger element of it, the through line. But a goal at this moment in this scene. What do I want in this scene? The character might be stepping into a scene and establishing real quickly, what do I want? Well, I want that. I want this. What is your objective? And that's what that is. So really the fourth one is objective. The first is hope, then fear, and then 3 is intent. 4th is objective or goal, but that objective. And the objective is something that occurs in every scene and must be in every scene. There is an objective. When I'm directorially looking at a script and studying that script for what it is I want to do for camera placements and blocking and all the elements, how I'm going to unfold it to the audience, it's the objectives and several of these other elements that, and hopes and fears, that guide my decision making on camera placement and blocking and the directorial elements, all of them. So let me suggest this, is objectives are almost always multiple in any scene, and certainly in different sequences, groups of scenes. Objectives, because the first objective will be, I'm seeking this. And then in addition to that objective, the 5th element I'm speaking of here is plan. Plan for how to reach that objective. That 5th element, plan. And that is something that is also very much affected by the arc. The arc meaning the change from beginning of the scene to the end of the scene, or beginning of the sequence to the end of the scene. Of course, the arc throughout the whole film, but the arc of what changes is objectives to some degree. I mean, specific objectives, not the overarching one, but the specific objectives in this scene and the goal, or the plan, I should say, of what I will do to reach that objective. And you've heard the term beat before. There's the scene, and then a subdivision of a scene is a beat. And a beat is usually defined by a change in a plan, or a change in objective. Very important as a writer that you understand that, because you will, in the majority of scenes, have something that will change the plan. The very purpose of having the scene is that there's something that changes. If you didn't have something changed from the end of the previous scene to the beginning of the next scene, if there wasn't something that changed, there would be no purpose for having that scene in there. So this scene in between the end of the previous one, the start of the next one, has changes that take place in the mind and heart of the character, in the plot and other characters, in circumstances, whatever it is. But those changes are usually a change of objective or a change of plan for reaching that objective. And so that's what a beat is. A beat is up to this point, now there's a change in the plan. Now I'm going to try this. And so dialogue goes that direction and actions go that direction. But that's not working. So now there's a change in the plan. So it's going to go this direction. And so usually in a scene, there will be more than one plan and sometimes more than one objective in that scene. Next one is, and this is huge, obstacles. What obstacles are being thrust upon this character in this scene, in this sequence of scenes, in the film overall. And so a list of obstacles, a list of problems, a list of barriers and issues to address in the mind and heart of the character. So that's number 6 right there. And so I'm addressing hopes, fears, intent, obstacle or objectives and plans, and now obstacles. That's number 6. And so as you're creating a list of obstacles, those are huge in relation to what it is that you are, that is causing the changes in every one of the scenes. Changes in plans, it's an obstacle that causes that. A change in objective, a smaller objective, not the overarching one necessarily, but a change in objective is caused by obstacles. Obstacles are driving forces in your film, in your screenplay. So your lists of obstacles are extremely important. And there has to be at least one, if not more than one, obstacle that is absolutely observed and believed by the audience to be insurmountable. There's no way they're going to get out of this. And therefore, that obstacle is, in the mind and heart of the audience, a major problem for them. I hope they can do this, but I don't see how it's going to happen. Well, there's the glue that's wrapped them right there until they find a way around that. So the sense and feeling that all is lost, or that the characters completely failed, that's the sense that comes out of major obstacle right there. And those are important in your film. And then, of course, you have to have something new, innovative, that is the solution to that obstacle. I say new and innovative because that's often what it is, but also might be something absolutely small, pedestrian, or average, but suddenly it's brought to the fore as, whoa, of course that's the solution. Well, the obstacles that you have will take on a myriad of different possibilities. So I'm number 6 there on obstacles. Number 7, I want to put in place here the whole concept of choices. And I think having characters that are volitional and make choices, a myriad of different possible choices out there, is important. And so one of the things that hopes and fears play into is a sense of what choices are available or possible out there. And I hope they do this. No, I fear they might do that, or this might happen. Those are choices. And so your lists of choices for each of the characters, main ones, of course, but those lists of choices are crucial and really precious, valuable to you. So your choices are very, very important. I wanted to address a whole other category of things next that I think are really valuable in your screenplay writing, and they connect absolutely with your creating three-dimensional characters in the strongest possible ways, and particularly characters for which each character you create is different. So one of the big problems I see in many problems I see in a lot of films, one of the big problems I see in a lot of films is that the writer or writers have fixated on certain character traits, on certain character elements and wording and mindsets of characters. And sadly, and this is where the mistakes are, all of the characters are about the same. They might look differently because it's a different person or different costumes or whatever playing something, but they all speak about the same. That's not the way life is. So what we need to do is have different characters who have different character traits. And I want to address 5 big things right there that are in relation to 3-dimensional characters and what those character traits can be. And those 5 things, the big 5 is what they're called, those big 5 personality traits, character traits. And I want to address them from a screenplay writing perspective, not from a psychology perspective, although they're one number. But I want to address those big 5 because you want to delineate your characters, each of them individually, with different emphasis or degrees of each of those 5 different elements there, and more as well, but those are the big 5. And so I'm going to come back in a different setting and a different circumstance.
Now, what I expressed in that previous section there, I am heartfelt anxious about, because there are a lot of lousy films made that lose their money for the investors and that lose the money opportunity for other filmmakers who might be making better films because the funds have been expended for those lousy films. Now, we can do much better than that. And so the thinking here is, when I expressed those things, especially the whole principle of the things that build in the minds and hearts of audiences, the things that bring them to hope for certain things that they want to see happen for that character, and also fear that, oh no, I hope they don't do this, or I hope that doesn't occur. Hope and fear are the glue that glue eyeballs to the screens. And that is crucial that you understand that and that you set those things up, as I expressed previously about that. I want to go into several other things here. I mentioned and kind of began to express about 3-dimensional characters and some of the things that are actually characterized by 5 words, and psychology people call them the big 5 personality traits. But I mentioned these because filmmaking takes its form from life. That's the source of how films should be created, like life. Well, you might say, well, life isn't nice, tidy, tied up in nice bows like some films are. No, life is not tidy. But also life has its vicissitudes and its elements that are true and meaningful and engaging of minds and hearts. And if we are creating characters that are not believable, not true, that are phony, that is just off-putting to the audience, and that just undoes the glue and that glues their eyes to the screen. It just totally puts people off. I'll give you a quick example, and then I'm going to launch into these 5 things. There was a company years back that had a phone system where they would call and a whole lot of people, and they sold a lot of video cassettes and then DVDs based on their outbound phone service that they would sell mostly to parents or grandparents and say, here's something of value to your family or your children or something. Well, my mother took the bait, and so she dropped by a video that had been so highly touted by these people. And I thought, well, let's see how this is. So I get my kids together who were 13, 10, and 7, which was right in the demographic for that particular film. And I sit them down and say, hey, let's take a look at this film. And we just are sitting comfortably on the couch there and starting to watch it. And I could tell myself personally, this was poorly done. And just from the very opening shots and how the dialogue was, and the writing and the directing especially was phony, but all of it was phony and not true to life. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm going to not give this away to my kids. I'm curious as to how they're going to react to it. And It didn't fool them for one moment. Within 2 minutes, I could see them glancing over to me and back to the TV and back and forth. And I'm thinking, oh, they're seeing what I'm seeing, but I didn't say anything. And within the first 4 minutes of it playing, it was my oldest who said, "Dad, do we have to watch this movie?" They were being polite. And I said, well, let's give it a chance. And it never got better. And within 8 minutes of it, none of them were interested in continuing at all. And even though concept-wise it was not a bad idea and had some merit, but the way it was written and the way it was directed were just phony, not true to life at all, unbelievable. And it wouldn't reach them, and it wouldn't reach me or anybody. And I was just appalled. So here are these 5 elements. And when I mention these 3-dimensional characters, these 5 personality traits, the big 5, you want to write a biography of each of your characters that you're writing about in your film script, in your screenplay. And for each of these characters, they must have some differences. One of the weaknesses, one of the big weaknesses of lousy films is that everybody's the same. Whether you're talking protagonist, antagonist, whoever, hero, anyone else, they are the same sounding in terms of the writing and the dialogue, in terms of how they seem to react and act and posture and position themselves. And that's lousy filmmaking, lousy writing. So if you take these 5 dimensions really of character traits, personality traits, recognize that every one of them is on a sliding scale, say 1 to 100, for example. And one of them, one trait, they might be very prominent in this. Another trait, they might be a little less. Another trait, maybe more. Maybe another trait, maybe less. And you would want these to be different for each of the characters in different ways. This will help differentiate them, each of your characters, as real human beings. And it also will help drive some of the dialogue, because certain things that are obvious to a person who has one very strong dominance of these 5 character traits and less dominant in some of the others will be quite different in how it's reacted to by somebody who has the opposite mode of character. And so here's the first one of these: openness. So if you're taking notes, write down the word openness. How open is my character? Is this particular character to new ideas, or to adventure, or to learning, or to growth, or to challenges, taking on a challenge? How open are they? Now, I will come back later to this in a larger degree, but arc becomes a very important aspect here. I say arc because very often a hero character is not open at all to this huge challenge before them. And that's actually true to life in most instances. But the character arc, starting one place and ending in another, may change any one or several of these personality traits. So openness may start here, may end here. And that is a very important thing to understand about every one of these personality traits. Openness, how open are they to a situation that is difficult for them? And how resistant are they to that? Zero openness versus 100% openness. They may be highly resistant to openness to new challenges and such. A second character trait or second personality trait here is conscientiousness. Conscientiousness is basically the willingness a person has to give attention to detail, to follow through, to take action, to complete something, to accomplish things. Conscientiousness is a character trait. It's the personality trait of one who is heroic. Now, it may not be at the beginning stage of their arc, and it's something that many experiences in Act 1, Act 2 prepare them for the openness and the conscientiousness they will need in Act 3. That's a very important mindset for you to have in your writing. The change, the character arc that occurs with each one of these personality traits in each one of these characters. All of us personally as people, but also every one of your characters, of course, have all 5 of these big 5 personality traits in us in varying degrees. The third one is extroversion. How extroverted is this character? And so as you're taking notes, as you're making a biography of this character, of each one of your characters, how extroverted are they? Some people are very introverted. That's a common trait, nothing wrong with that. A lot of people are that way. And yet there's also character arcs that can change to some degree. But introversion would be way low in the extroversion scale. Extroverted in the high end of that would be very much friendly, gregarious, all of that. And so the extroversion component is the third of the big 5 personality traits. And very important that these are different for each character that you're writing. The fourth one is agreeableness. How agreeable is this person? 0 would be a very disagreeable person who would be contrarian to almost anything. And 100% would be anything you say they go along with. Now, most people, fortunately, are somewhere in the mid-range there. It shouldn't be 100%, shouldn't be 0% either. So your agreeableness will be a factor there. For example, if you've got a person who is antagonist there in your film, they may be quite disagreeable, or at least disagreeable according or in relationship to the protagonist. And so there are variable elements that come in on each of these. Those are the first 4 of the 5. The 5th one is neurosis or neuroticism. And neurosis is basically mental illness of some kind or another, something that doesn't make sense, but they therefore do it. They do it anyway, even without it making sense. I mean, there are many character traits or tics or hang-ups or wrong assumptions or other things that could be in that neurosis or neuroticism category there. If you spell the word ocean, O-C-E-A-N, that's how you can help remember these things. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, neuroticism. And those are very valuable for you to know in your writing, use in your writing, because they are part of life. People are this way. You are, I am, all of us, in varying degrees. Now, character arc is crucial for you to understand that. Every one of these will have some arc, depending on what the character is. There are a few characters who won't have hardly any arc, but your key characters will have some. Generally, an antagonist will not have much of a character arc. Otherwise, they wouldn't be antagonistic, perhaps. But these 5 character personality traits are very important in bringing about 3-dimensional characters so that they're not all the same. And especially when you're writing dialogue, you want to make sure that your characters are appropriate in how they say things, meaning the wording of them, and according to their personality and their character that you've written your biography for. And there are some many screenplays I've seen and seen on the screen that everybody sounds the same, and that's the error right there. They're not using these big five personality traits, and therefore they're not creating 3-dimensional characters. 3-dimensional characters also are ones who are on that character arc. So let me talk about that for a moment. Character arc is a crucial thing in the sense that all of us go through that in one way or another throughout our lives. It's part of life. And character arc is that which starts in one place, and there are reasons why the needle is moved to another place. And there are several places and ways in which character arc matter greatly. So first of all, as a writer and also in directing and as for actors, we need to understand that the character is in this position at the beginning of the screenplay. They're in that position at the end of the screenplay. What causes them to change? So you need to have a number of things that are causations that move the needle of their art. And the audience needs to track that, not necessarily always consciously so, but it needs to be there, it needs to be real for the audience to be able to follow along and to be with you. There are events, elements, aspects of what happened in each scene that move the needle. And there may be some things that move it slightly backwards or revert somewhat, but then others that move it forward. And so the character arc is a crucial thing. How is my character at the beginning? How is my character at the end? What are the attributes, the thinking, the assumptions, the mindset, the heart set? Where is their heart? What are they pursuing? What are they seeking? I mentioned previously intent, which is kind of an overarching thing, but also objectives. Objectives are changes of what they're seeking, which end up causing character arc moves. Also, I mentioned as well plans, so an objective, and then a plan for reaching that objective, and then a change of plan. That's like we talked about before, about beat in a scene. This beat, it's a beat because the plan changes, and there's a pivot of some kind, and the objective may change, and then later a different objective may come about, which is the impetus for a new scene. And all of these things move the needle of the character arc as well, in one form or another, in one degree or another. And so all of these things interact with each other. Another thing regarding character arc is very often, and this is totally fine, this is understandable, you're reading through your screenplay and doing another pass to rewrite, a rewrite pass. And you need to make sure, okay, I'm on page 68 right now, and you've got to make sure, okay, where is that character arc needle at this point? Very crucial that you register that consciously in your mind. I'm writing page 68. It's scene 38, for example. And that scene is starting with the character arc here. It's ending it with it here. And you need to make sure you're aware of that so that you're not throwing in things that are confusing to the audience, because this character didn't know certain things on page 68 that they learned and knew on page 88. But they do know certain things that they picked up on page 38. So the character arc must be in your consciousness in writing every time you're sitting in front of your keyboard to add more to this, because the confusion that you may have or haziness of where that arc is draws away from the audience's commitment to your storyline, to your characters, and diffuses and takes away from that hope and fear connection the audience needs to have with the characters on the screen. So I mentioned that in regard to character arc. There's also plot arc. There's also story arc, you might say as well, that where that needle is at each moment and what causes it to move and why are crucial things right there. Let me bring up another topic here now, and that is subtext. Amateurs don't even think about subtext, or they think about it in odd, weird ways. Real professional writers understand subtext. And so let's address what that means, what that is. Subtext is, of course, it's the meaning between the lines. It's the unspoken real meanings. You want to see one of the finest examples of subtext, go to one of the best film screenplays ever written. And if you look on the AFI, American Film Institute, 100 best screenplays of all times, number one, at least most years it has been, number one is Casablanca. And you look in Casablanca and there's that scene where you have out into the, it's probably 2/3 of the way through, 3/4 of the way through there, and the two main characters are seeing each other out in the on the street in a marketplace. And the previous night has been very, very negative in relation to them seeing each other after a while. And in doing that, Ilsa is approached by a marketer or a salesperson who says, for the pretty lady, would you like this? Holds up some lace, something, and she says, I'm not interested. Well, Rick is right there talking with her, and he's really talking about Rick. I'm not interested. And that is just a marvelous example of subtext, just infused and interwoven throughout that scene right there. I mention that because one of my favorite books on screenwriting is the book called Story by Robert McKee, and one of the finest books out there. And there are a number of other very good ones, but he prominently expresses that in relation to subtext. So I mentioned that regarding subtext because subtext is basically something that is respectful of the audience, honors the audience, and honors the audience in the sense of being respectful that they have the smarts, the ability to figure out what's going on. And some of the dialogue is maybe subtly referring to something, but it's not directly at all referring to it in a very direct sense. But the audience understands that. Why? Because as humans, we all do that. This is drama takes its form from life, and this is life. We deal with subtext, all of us do, in one form or another, in one degree or another, in different times, in different relationships. So subtext, and I say this because, in fact, most of these areas that I'm addressing here, you've got a draft of your screenplay, or you're constructing your draft of it. You go through a second rewrite, a third, fourth rewrite. You should do one rewrite fairly early on to specifically look for areas you can put into subtext, areas you can make subtext there. And that would mean how you write the dialogue, how you express it. Be very careful that you're not being too clever. You don't want to be, the cliche phrase is too clever by half. You don't want to be too clever so that it's obtuse and buried in there, because that's something that's off-putting to the audiences as well. It's like, oh, what's going on here? Instead, make sure that it's true to life, but not too buried either. But subtext is valuable. There's an important point that Robert McKee makes in his book Story, where he says, if a writer does not put subtext in certain places, particularly in a relationship, for example, actors will automatically do that. And sometimes directors will direct them to do this. An actor will then speak lines that are fairly straightforward, but do it in a way that's almost implying, I'm not really meaning this. I'm meaning something different. And it can take a film in a whole new direction than what you intended. Now, the opposite of subtext is called on-the-nose dialogue. On the nose. You hit it on the nose. Okay, well, some things do need to be hit on the nose, but not everything. And perhaps not even the majority of things. On-the-nose dialogue is just so obvious that who cares? But reality is that you're dealing with relationships and human relationships that we don't always on the nose state everything we're thinking when we're in a relationship with somebody, we're talking. We'll kind of make a little bit of a leap here and there, and they'll be tracking us. It's just part of life. So be careful of not too much on the nose dialogue. And subtext is very, very valuable. Let me mention another thing. I mentioned doing a pass through the script, searching for things you could transfer into a subtext mode. There's another kind of a path you should have, a writing path to convert words, dialogue, into visuals. This is kind of a hybrid of subtext. A writing path that makes it so that you are actually looking at this whole scene and you're thinking, okay, how can I make as much of this scene visual and as little of it verbal as possible? And I say that because so many times a writer, especially one who's fairly good with dialogue and who is extroverted and open, has openness themselves, sometimes they will put everything into dialogue. And if you do a writing path or two that you are absolutely focused on one thing and one thing only, and that is to convert as many words into visuals as possible, you will find magic happening in your screenplay. Because you will, by the magic, I mean, it'll become subtext, but it'll also become even more powerful. There's an old statement that says, when you're writing, try to write with very good clarity, and then, if necessary, use words. The clarity is visual. And after all, the name of this whole medium is motion pictures, or television, or moving pictures. This is what we're dealing with here. A writing of a novel is quite a different thing, as you know. Sometimes I'll hand a script to someone, an executive producer or type or whatever, and I'll say, here's this script. Don't read it. And they say, well, what do you mean don't read it? It's a script. I'm supposed to read it. Don't you want me to read it? And I say, no, I don't want you to read it. A script is not meant to be read. A novel is meant to be read, but a script is not meant to be read. It's meant to be filmed. So you have to watch this script. Don't read it, watch it. Yeah, they have to pick up the words with their eyes and all that, but it's a visual medium we're in. So that's another very important thing. Let me mention something else here that I think is just magic. It's happened with me on several occasions, magic, as I'm writing a script. There, years ago, a couple of decades ago, there was a cliche term that went all around Hollywood called high concept films. And it had several different interpretations of what it meant and all that. But basically, it boiled down to a concept of a film that could be characterized in a 2-minute trailer or preview, especially could be characterized in a 30-second TV spot, and would create a gut reaction in the audience to wanting to watch this. Oh, I got to watch that. That grabs me. And they don't even necessarily know all the reasons why, but it has a gut reaction was the term. They call that, oh, that's a high concept film. And that's good. There are some films that are not high concept in terms of all the nuances and such. But I sat down and I thought, okay, if I were going to write the 2-minute trailer, 2-minute preview for this film of this script, haven't even filmed it yet, but I've got this script I've written here. What would I want in the 2-minute trailer? And what would I want in the 30-second TV spot? And I went through and I thumbed through the page, back and forth through the pages. You know what? This has got to be in here. Oh, that's got to be in there. That's got to be in there. Why? Because these create a gut reaction, a very powerful emotion. And so I went and grabbed through some of those and dropped them into a new file, new file on the computer. These will be the script, really, for what will end up being the trailer or for the TV spot. And of course, I'll be filming along with the major film itself. But an interesting thing occurred, which I hadn't anticipated before doing this. And that is, suddenly I thought, oh, in addition to this and this and this, I ought to have a scene that has this visual in it. I ought to have a scene that has that dialogue piece in it, that dialogue element in it. And suddenly I find myself writing whole new scenes that are highly emotional and highly meaningful in the storyline and to the characters and what is happening in my screenplay. And I thought, wow, this is magic. I would have never even thought of these if I hadn't sat down and thought, what should the 2-minute trailer or the 30-second spot look like I have in it? And suddenly I'm coming up with new things that I never anticipated before as a result of that. Okay, I need to get back to the last of these elements here that I want you to really, really understand. And I mentioned character arc, such a crucial thing, and the changes that have to take place there. There's one other really important element. I haven't really got a name for this yet. I need to come up with a name for it, but it's basically the things which the audience relates with. Let me just mention here in relation to this. Everybody knows that I'm digging way back through history here in filmmaking. Everybody knows the film that Frank Capra directed and that Jimmy Stewart was in that was called It's a Wonderful Life. So here's a question I have for you. Who are you watching on the screen? Are you watching George Bailey? Yeah. Who are you really watching? The answer is you're watching yourself. And as much as you can make your key character be someone that they can see themselves in, that will create great loyalty to your film, and it'll glue eyeballs to there. And it'll also add to the whole approach of what they hope for, audience hopes for, audience fears, if they see themselves on the screen. And so be a student of life. This is my concluding suggestion here. Be a student of life. Sit somewhere and listen to, be respectful and ethical about this, but listen to people talking. Listen to how they talk with each other. Sit down and hear other people in a restaurant or other places and how they are expressing themselves. Be a student of life. Be well-read, read a whole lot, and read a lot of screenplay writing books, but write a lot of dialogue notes, write a lot of concept notes. I have on my computer a lot of several files, whole bunch of file folders, almost one for every year, dialogue notes, 2020, dialogue notes, 2021. Here's another one for plot concepts or actions or events. And I grab these. Some of them are from media and such that I see, and meaning media. Here's a report from a reporter from some blog or something, and they mention something, and I think that's the kernel of a fascinating little element, not a whole story, but an element that could add depth to a character. And so I want to have as many of those on my list. I mentioned early on, make lists. So these are the lists you want to have. The 5 personality traits, big 5. You want to have lists of things that will glue eyeballs to the screen that they hope for, lists of things that they fear, and lists of things that are objectives, lists of things that are plans for reaching those objectives, lists of obstacles, huge, important, list of obstacles, lists of obstacles. The more and more daunting obstacles you have, the more audiences will be grabbed by what it is you're writing, because they'll be hoping more and fearing more for your characters right there. So anyway, there's my thoughts on all of that. That I think I hold those in high importance in my writing. I look for those in scripts that I'm seeking to direct. I'm looking for these things because they tell me where to put camera angles and how to direct the actors and how to structure a scene and unfold it to the audience. These things that I've gone over with you, I think, are extremely important, extremely valuable. I wish you well and look forward to reading your screenplays. Thank you very much.
Hello. Is that messing me up? So don't join voice.
back to Edge of the Universe. This hour we have a presentation by Christine Nielsen, who also publishes under the name C.M. Adler. The presentation is called The Morning After. I have my edits back. Now what? I'll now turn it over to Christine.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody who's still here. Thank you for spending part of your Saturday afternoon with me on this beautiful August day. I am going to talk about the, I call it the morning after. It is basically what to do. You've submitted edits to an editor, you've gotten your edits back, and now what? And it's really kind of guiding you along the path in general from that part of the process to the publishing process. And a lot of it is that as new authors, we don't know what we're doing, but we end up being essentially, because editors are work for hire and everything else that you pay for is outsourced, you are actually in charge of the business and the one making the decisions, even though you might feel like you know the least. So we are going to go through kind of a step-by-step process for you to determine how to go from those edits that you just got back to the point of publication, which at whatever form of publication represents your goals as an author. I am trying to look at my screen. I have a presentation and it's not sharing. So I will end up sharing that on my website or whatever. I'll get it to you guys later. I just really like the visual. It's kind of a chalkboard. I'm a teacher. My background is teaching, and I've been freelance editing now for 4 years, and I love it. It's my calling in life. So I have my edits back. Now what? This is a walk through the post-editing process. You hooked up with an editor. Everything felt like it was going to be more than you hoped for. Now you have your edits back and you're feeling a bit confused. So I'm going to walk you through a process. A lot of it involves some self-reflection and some honesty with yourself so that you have some idea of how to put all the pieces together to get to that level of publication that you're looking for. So the first thing you're going to do when you get your edits back, and there are different kinds of edits. So sometimes it's a manuscript evaluation, sometimes it's a developmental edit, sometimes it's a content or line edit. You need to review the edits that you get back very carefully. The goal here is for you to understand the content of those edits. What is it that the editor is communicating with you? So you should have some time from the time that those edits get back to you to the time that you get back with the editor to have all your questions answered. And editors have different processes. That communication can be in document. So sometimes if there are notes left in the document, you can actually go back in Microsoft Word, track changes. You can go back and respond to those comments in the margins or leave your own comment for any edit that the editor has marked, asking your question about understanding or whatever. So that is one way to communicate that might work very well for people, especially if you're doing more content edit, so that you can understand why some of those smaller changes were made and have those all in one place and see that sort of thread of that dialogue between you and the editor. I always do a video chat at the end so that there's a dialogue. And you can ask questions. We go over the manuscript or whatever we're looking at, whatever notes that we put together between the two of us as far as your manuscript goes, and we can discuss kind of in that. I like that. That is a good time to discuss, okay, what do I do now? You can also email, text, call. I've done all of them. You can stalk us. I have that on here, and I thought it was kind of funny. Kind of bummed it's not showing up for you guys, but you'll get to see it later, and I'm really just kidding about the stalking. So your mode of communication with the editor is determined partly by what their preferences are and what their boundaries are, and partly by, how you work. I have some clients who like to text. That's fine. I have some who like to email. That's fine. Everybody does a video chat. That is the way that I like to communicate with my clients. That's my preference. I like the back and forth that you can't quite get from a lot of the other modes. Be prepared that at some point that dialogue will turn over into paid or chargeable time for that editor. I mean, that's a boundary. It's our time. This is our profession. This is the expertise that you're paying us for as pay for hire, work for hire. So, so your goal in reviewing the edits, like I said, is to understand the content. What is it that the editor is communicating with you? If the editor didn't seem to understand something or that you did in your story, that's also communicating with you. It's like, okay, this is not coming across the way that I wanted it to. And you guys can have a dialogue about how you can make that happen. So that's working within the content of those edits. So where do you want to go from here? So your next step is what other development does your story need? Does it need a developmental edit? I just received a manuscript for content edits. I don't believe that it's ready. There are editors who won't even do content or line edits on a story that has not been through a developmental edit. That's actually some good advice. Either a developmental edit or a manuscript evaluation to look at, like, is the story actually ready for this smaller, more fine-tuned level of editing, or are you wasting your money essentially? So it's important to know, I guess, from reviewing the edits, to have a very clear idea of where your story is in the stage of from rough draft to publication, and what else does the story itself need. That is partly determined by your publication goals for your story. If you are looking for a traditional publication, so you're looking to submit the story, that does require a different level of editing than if you're going to self-publish that story. Is the story your lead magnet for building your fan base? Is it a short story that you're submitting to an anthology? Is it part of a short story collection that you are self-publishing? What is your goal with this piece of writing? And that will determine probably several things for you and for the editor. The editor should know that from the outset. What are we getting your manuscript ready for? And their comments and things should be geared toward that goal. You might not know what you're working with. You might not know what level your story's at. And that should have come, that's part of the understanding the content of the edits. So in assessing your story publication goals, consider also, like, everybody thinks like traditional publisher, I want to make it big. I want to do nothing. I want to be a famous writer where I do nothing but write. And that is where my entire income comes from. But what does your income need to be? For some people, that could be like $40,000. I mean, maybe not in this economy, but maybe that's all maybe if you want to write full time, then maybe all you want to do is pay your bills. That's a different level of editing, marketing than if you are trying to submit to one of the big five and be a front list author. That is a different process. That is a different, possibly a different investment. I don't know. That's what you have to answer. So the goal of assessing your story publication goals is partly to define your HEA, your happily ever after. What does the bigger picture look like? I've met some authors at big conferences who are making like $35,000 a month. They are spending 14 hours a day, 7 days a week at their computer, trying to crank out the writing at a pace where they can release a book or two every single month. And they're trying to maintain that income level, but their health is in the toilet. They don't see the light of day. They don't spend any time with their family. So what is your happily ever after when it comes to big picture? So that you can get a grip on what that will require and how your editor and the editing process and revision process for your story can help you reach that goal. So my number 4, let's review the first 3. So number 1 is review your edits and make sure you understand the content and the communication that you have going with your editor. 2 is review your actionable items from that edit. What is it going to take within the manuscript itself to get that manuscript to what the point that you need it to be to reach your publication goals? 3 is assess your story publication goals and define those beyond just, do you want to be traditionally published or do you want to be indie published? Do it within the context of your of the scope of your entire life, because you are, I'm assuming you're not doing this in order to be miserable, right? In order to be doing things you really don't want to do. If you want to spend 14 hours a day at your computer doing nothing but writing, that's okay. But that's something that you want to be clear on. So now number 4 is assess your skill set. So within the scope of where your manuscript is now, and where where your manuscript needs to be or where you want it to be, what in that scope, what is it, what, first of all, what does that look like? Does it look like going back to developmental edits, multiple drafts? Are you able to do content line edits? Do you like doing content line edits? Are you able to proofread? Do you like to proofread? So it's a mix of what are you capable of doing? This is a real moment of honesty here. What are you capable of doing? What are you actually good at? And then what do you want to do? What of all of those tasks, what part of those are tasks that you want to do as part of your journey toward that success, that goal? You know what? I know that I need to do, need to do marketing, maybe need to send out emails. I hate doing that. I am not an email writer. I'm not going to send my fans chatty emails every 2 weeks. That's me. Is that you? Do you like to chat up your fans? Is that a way that you want to engage your fan base? So to get to that level of success, that's part of the scope of work, is fan engagement. How do you want to do that? Do you want to do that? Maybe you just want to write, in which case then your end goal might need to be a publisher who genuinely actually takes care of the marketing for you, instead of a lot of publishers who will publish and then you still have to do a lot of that. Or maybe you need to look at hiring a virtual assistant who does that as well. Okay, so here comes to number 5. So within that, and I'm going through these fast, so that's why I'm going to leave quite a bit of time for questions for everybody, so that we can have some dialogue. My style in general is a lot more back and forth and interaction. So this is kind of our topic outline for this. So number 5, is assess your budget. So after you have okay, here's where my manuscript is now. Here's where it needs to be. Here's what I'm good at or want to do, and here's everything else. So what does your budget look like? And now your budget comes from 2 different places, money and time. And there will be people who say that, I don't have the money for that. Well, or I don't have the time for that. My personal philosophy is everybody has the time and money for the things that matter to them the most. So paying your mortgage matters more than paying for a bunch of services. Then that is a decision that you need to make. It's not that you don't have enough money, it's that you're choosing different priorities for your money, or choosing different priorities for your time. And then if you're like everybody else, I don't know, I don't really have a lot of money, and I don't really have a lot of time. So so instead of saying, maybe not looking at it as, I don't have a lot of money, I don't have a lot of time, look at what money you do have and are willing to invest, and what time you do have and what time you are willing to invest. So it's not don't focus on what you don't have, focus on what you do have. And then that's part of the bigger picture for you. Number 6, after you've assessed your budget, is to assess available tools. So you might not need to hire a person, or maybe you do need to hire a person for different things. On my list of possible tools, there's plotting software. Even if you're a pantser, I've found that it's very valuable for clients to take what they've written and kind of reverse engineer it back into some plotting software. You can even use like, you know, those note cards that you had to use for research papers in high school, if you're at least like kind of my age, when we did everything old school. Those work too. Write out your main plot beats or chapter summaries on those cards, or plug it into some plotting software. I like Plotter. I'm not getting paid for any references. I do like Plotter because it's shareable, if you get the right version. And as an editor, I can work with my clients within the software. But so you might even reverse engineer your plot into that, and then see where you might need to move these bigger chunks around to get more emotional impact from your story, or, you know, add scenes that are missing, etc. Writing grammar software, there are things like ProWritingAid and Grammarly. There's now AI, and we are just to a point where, while there are some authors who are on one camp and up in arms about feeling like AI might be somewhat a threat. Then there's the other side of like, no, we're going to embrace it and use it for our success there. But so don't think of AI necessarily just as ChatGPT or software that does the writing for you. They are developing AI that will handle your marketing content, that will post to Facebook, that will handle your, I mean, it's crazy. You could basically have an AI for everything. So is AI more usable for you? Do you want to hire a virtual assistant? Do you want to learn it and do it yourself? Publishing gateways, things like Draft to Digital, all the different platforms are technically publishing gateways. Do you want to handle all your separate platforms? Do you want to go to one place and have it do it for you? All these services cost money. There's also formatting software. So that was kind of my short list. So two things, they all cost money. They all cost time. If you're going to do this yourself, this is your learning curve. If this is something you want to do and that you feel like you might be relatively good at, all of these tools are available to you. If it's not your alley, then maybe there are parts of this that you hire out. This is going back to where you needed to be honest with yourself. Let me give you an example. I have a client who did a manuscript evaluation. Pretty good story content, concept, everything. Writing itself a little bit rough. Not a real solid grasp on grammar, word choice, sentence structure, the structural part of the writing. Well, this client wanted to use ProWritingAid and Grammarly to do those edits, and did not understand enough about grammar and the structure in the first place to even understand what ProWritingAid was trying to help have happen. So that's a moment of honesty. You still have to have a high enough level of understanding of that area in order to use the tool effectively. Or maybe you are willing to learn that much in order to use the tool effectively rather than hiring an expert for that. That's something to consider. That's part of the honesty, where you are assessing your goals, you're assessing your own skill set, and you are assessing your budget and the available tools. So the goal of this is to assess your resources and how. So going back to, here's where your manuscript is, here's where it needs to be, here's your scope of the work when it comes to budget and time. How are you going to fill in the gaps? And that needs to become part of your plan, which is next, map a plan. So of all of these, in all of these areas, this is where you need to be making decisions. So here, mapping a plan, this is where you decide, here are the parts of this process that I'm going to take care of. Here are the parts of the process that I'm going to hire a human being to do. Here are the parts of the process that I'm going to pay for or access tools to accomplish in order for me to get to, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, in order to self-publish, in order to crowd publish, or, submit to agents or publishers. So really a lot of it is stepping back, and I cannot emphasize enough that be honest with yourself about what you are capable of doing and about what you want to do. Because if you burnout comes from, or discouragement, it comes from ending up doing you want to be a writer because it will somewhat, I mean, everybody says it's a job, right? But you want to be a writer because you want to turn it into a career. And you want to have a life, at least I do, is kind of how I picture it. You want to have a life where you can go hiking on a Wednesday morning and you don't have some boss in the office telling you that you have to sit in your little cubicle or whatever. If that's one of your goals, which goes back to the point of like, what are your goals? What's your happily ever after? If that's part of it, then you're not going to be happy and you're not going to maintain your creative productivity if you end up creating a job for yourself where you're doing a lot of tasks that you really don't enjoy. Because I know I mean, if you're anything like me, writing is the entire point is that it's fun. It's fun. You want to connect with fans. You know, some people write because they want an award. That's what matters to them. Well, okay, then your goal is to earn awards, and let's see what it takes to get there. What parts of that do you want to do? What parts of that are you willing to hire out? And what's your time frame? Because that might also, I mean, that's part of your time budget. If you want to submit by the end of the year, what is it going to take to get there? And that is, like I said, that is part of the honesty. Number 8 is execute. So this is where you actually start to do the things that you have in your plan. Here's the part that you're doing. Does that need to be done first? So are you hiring an editor? Are you hiring a book cover designer? Which I personally highly recommend, but some people are good at digital or graphic design. That's fine. This is when you subscribe or buy the different softwares or tools that you have decided you're going to learn how to use to reach your goal, to fill in your skill gaps or fill in your time gaps, and execute. And then it means button share. It means actually following through and doing those things, ideally within kind of a reasonable time frame. But you know, some people aren't in a hurry, and I hear that all the time when I have someone, you know, have me a manuscript evaluation. No, please take your time. Don't rush. Everybody wants quality over speed. And so, but some people have made very, very good careers and really enjoy speed over quality. And that's not bad. None of this is good or bad. This is really genuinely like a look at what you want your author world, your author life to look like. And the sooner you start building it in that way, the more satisfied you will be with the entire thing that you have going on. And I'm getting through this fast. Okay. So the morning after, first of all, review your edits and make sure that you understand the content. That is communicating with your editor. So, and that should determine next steps. I know that when I do like a manuscript evaluation, when I do an edit, I always recommend, here's what I would do next. Here's what I would recommend next. Here's where I see the general on the, you know, path to your goal. This is where this is how far or at what point I see your manuscript being right now. And this is what I think you're going to need to do to get it to that end goal. Review actionable items. And that's what I just barely summarized. So with your editor, say, okay, so I am here. This is what needs to happen for me to get this here. And the here is assess your story and publication goals. Do you want to indie publish? Do you want to submit for traditional publishing? Is this something that you're just writing for fun? Is it for family? Do you just want to do a good job with it? I feel like some people write because that's the community that they want to be involved in, and publication's not necessarily a really high priority. So with your manuscript and with your publication goals, what is your skill set within that scope of work that needs to be done to get from point A to point B? And then in addition to your skill set, what is your budget? And that includes time as well as money. What are you willing to afford? Number 6, assess the available tools to fill in some of the gap, like fill in some of that space. What considering your skill set and what your budget is. So the tools can save you time. Sometimes it's just a one-time thing. You get it set up. It's a set it and forget it kind of situation. I know I like to work that way. I don't like things that I have to babysit because I would rather be writing or editing. Actually, I really love editing. Then with all of that in mind, make a map for you. We go to all these conferences and we take in all this advice, and I've done it myself. I go to the LTUE every year. I go to 20 books to 50K. I have notebooks full of notes, and they really have become notebooks full of good intentions. And it's because I'm taking advice from people who said, I did it like this. I recommend that you do it the same way to reach the same point. And I have never been happy trying to do the things the same way that someone else has done. They're not me. I'm not them. Learning more and more about that. I'm INFJ. I'm an introvert. I don't like social media. Why am I going to do my dream career or pursue my dream career in order to just have to do things that I don't like to do? And then there's the other side of like, okay, so there are some things in life that you don't like to do that you just have to do. So where's the balance among those? So you're going to make your own plan that says, you know what? I know me. I know what I'm going to be good at. I know what I'm going to follow through with. I have this much discipline to do things I don't like. I have this much discipline to do things I like. Here's what's left over. Am I going to learn how to use a tool to take care of that part of the process or that part of my path or my plan? Am I going to hire somebody to do that? Is this phase 1? Phase 1, I do it all. Phase 2, I hire a personal assistant. I don't know. That's something that you have to dive into. And then 8 is execute, actually doing the things, right? Some of us who are more creative and visionary like to think about it a lot. Doing it's not so much fun. So that's also just part of what you need to consider in, what you do with that editing information on your manuscript. Okay, so I think I have left roughly 10-ish minutes for questions. And I know that I talked fast. So yes, I would be very happy to take questions.
Excellent. All right, so the first question is, how do you know when you're ready for an editor?
You're always ready for an editor. My number one recommendation is to start with a manuscript evaluation for multiple reasons. It is the lowest level of commitment, both financially and time-wise, for both you and the editor. So it's a very, very good way to get an overview of your story. That's exactly what a manuscript evaluation is intended to do, is tell you, hey, here's your goal. Here's where your manuscript is. This is what I recommend. This is the order of operations I recommend you go through this. So that's a tough question. So, that's actually pretty simple. You are ready. Whenever you feel like you just don't even know what to do with it anymore, that's when you're ready for an editor. And I highly recommend doing a manuscript evaluation, because that'll give you an overview. That'll let you know what the editor sees as your strengths and weaknesses as a writer. So that'll give you some idea of what you might be looking at hiring out for or finding tools to help you with. And it's the least expensive in the scope of things. So it's just not going to, you're going to get a lot of information for a very budget-minded dollar amount. Now, if you're looking, if you don't know, like, do I need this is what the manuscript evaluation will tell you to do. If you're wondering if you need a developmental edit versus like a content line edit, it's pretty consistently true that you're not going to be ready for a content line edit, which is expensive, unless you've had some kind of developmental edit. But that's, I mean, and then I presented to another group and talked about this. Editors are we're freelance for a reason. We're freelance because we like our own flexibility. So that means that you can take advantage of some of that flexibility, talk to an editor and say, hey, this is kind of what I need. I don't know if I need a full manuscript evaluation. I don't really know if I need a developmental edit. Can I do some weird combination of those things? Or can I have something called a fast pass where, you know what, I'm going to just read it and I'm going to give you 1-page summary thoughts and a bullet list of like, this is the order in which I would tackle your next round of edits. We're flexible. So if you find an editor you would like to work with, I would spend a little bit of time, and most of us are very happy to do this, spend a little bit of time getting to know them and discussing your manuscript and where you believe that it is and what you're wanting from it, and say, hey, could I just get this? Here is my budget or whatever. So I think it kind of goes both directions. But my bottom line recommendation would be to start with a manuscript evaluation.
Okay. Next question. How extensive would you suggest editing your manuscript prior to queries if you're aiming for traditional publication?
If you're aiming for traditional publication, I would do a manuscript evaluation or a developmental edit. I would not spend money on content line edits. The publisher, all they care about is your story structure, the emotional content, how developed your world is. They do not care if you have a period in the right place. They don't care, about your word choice. If it's really bad, you need some spelling corrections and things like that, I would do something to kind of clean that up, whether it's within the scope of your skill set or whether you need to hire that out. But for traditional publisher, I would do a manuscript evaluation or developmental edit. I would not pay for content line or proofreading because the publisher is going to, even agents will do some editing of a story for you. That's going to be built in. That is part of what I would definitely expect from a traditional publishing route.
Okay. When working with an editor, where do you find the balance between that's your profession and I should take your advice, and this is a difference of opinion, and the suggested change would take away from the story I crafted?
I mean, that really kind of describes it perfectly. I'm very, very okay as an editor with, I will speak my mind. I'm going to give you everything I have in that edit. My professional opinion, I don't know that it's as important that you take my advice as much as you understand why I am suggesting what I'm suggesting. And I have clients who will dig in their heels despite, and I will even repeat the same advice, and that's okay. I think it's just it's important to understand why they're making that suggestion, not necessarily following their suggestion or accepting their suggestion and making that change. Ultimately, it is your story. And most of us are writing series, and the editor might be suggesting a change that you cannot afford to make because you know how that detail is going to play out later in the story. So that's when you kind of go back to that communication level and say, okay, so I'm having a hard time with this. You made this suggestion. This is why I don't agree with it. Can I understand why you're suggesting that change, so that maybe there might be something else in the manuscript that needs to be adjusted in order for that story element to have the effect or impact that you were intending for it to have. And the biggest conflict that I see between me and any of my writers. And we're work for hire. You guys are the ones who are in charge. So whatever we're doing for you, it is completely up to you how you implement this. The biggest conflict I have or difference of opinion is when I make a suggestion. So confusion does not equal suspense. And there have been many times when I've offered a suggestion in order to clarify something and the author doesn't want to change it because they think that creates suspense, when really I'm like, no, it's actually just really confusing. So what you're risking is that the reader's going to drop it. And that's probably, but then, they all hold on to it. No, I've just built all this. Then the story loses all its tension. Then you might have a bigger issue with the story than that, like, one thing that you're trying to hold on to. But I would say that's the moment where I had the greatest difference of opinion on a manuscript from the author is, okay, you're trying to create suspense with this, but what you're creating is confusion. And they're like, no, but if I give that away, then I don't have any surprise at the end. But sometimes, and often actually, the reader knowing more and knowing the danger, so the different ways, and that's a whole other discussion, but sometimes the reader knowing more than the characters know creates the same suspense that you're trying to create and nobody knowing what's going on. So, but the short answer to that is you are the master of your universe. This is your story. So if there's a suggestion that an editor makes that you don't agree with because you feel like it messes up a lot of what you're trying to do in the story, I suggest just really trying to understand why the editor is making that suggestion. What is it that suggestion or that change would be intended to accomplish in the bigger scope of the story? No more questions. We're done early. I might have slowed down a little bit. I don't even know how many viewers I have. Hi guys. I do have a surrogate audience. I put my little Lego Raptors or T-Rexes up so I'd have something to look at other than just the bright light of my little camera. I really enjoy speaking with editing. I'm really grateful to LTUE for putting these things together and the volunteer crew. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to the audience. And thank you for those questions. And if you guys have any more.
There's one more question. It just popped in.
Okay.
What is a reasonable budget to get started?
You can actually probably, depends on how big your manuscript is. Because it's really a matter of time. So get started on what part of the process, like hiring an editor or looking at tools that are available, or like you guys want a hard dollar amount. So for 100,000 word plus manuscript, I would start with a budget of about $700. That would be either a manuscript edit or kind of fast pass developmental edit if you want the editor to get into the manuscript itself instead of just give you notes. Yeah, less than that is obviously less money. So it really just depends on the length of your manuscript.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, thank you so much for presenting with us.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone else for joining us today. This has been Edge of the Universe, and we hope to see you at our main event in February.